Welcome to The Economy. How do you measure that? Where we break down how we measure what's really going on in the economy, one transaction at a time. I'm your host, Jim Terbrake. Today's episode, World Cup sponsorships. How do you measure that? The World Cup isn't just about football. It's also about brands. From logos on jerseys to advertising boards around the pitch, companies spend billions of dollars to sponsor the tournament. But here's the question: what exactly are companies buying when they sponsor the World Cup? And how does that show up in economic statistics? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Yannick Damgaard. Yannick, let's start with the basics. So, when a company sponsors the World Cup, how does that show up in the statistics?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Jim, and thanks for the question. So, in the national accounts, we would treat that as a purchase of advertising services. So, basically, the company is buying brand exposure. So, that could be naming rights, or it could be logo placement, or it could be other types of visibility. So, this kind of transaction, we would record that as a service transaction and not as a transfer.
Okay, so they're not just giving the money to the organizer; they're actually paying for a service.
Yeah, that is correct. And the key distinction we have in the system of national accounts is the principle of a quid pro quo. So, in other words, if the company is getting something in return, then we treat it as a transaction. We also call this a requited transaction, and it's recorded as a service.
Okay, so how is that actually being recorded?
So, if you look at it from the sponsor's perspective, this is intermediate consumption, which is basically a cost of doing business. And if you look at it from the organizer's perspective, this is measured as output. So, it would give a positive contribution to GDP.
Okay, so kind of like an expense for the sponsor and a revenue, if you would, for the sponsor or the organization hosting the tournament. So let's talk about timing, right? So I seem to remember that these sponsorship deals are worked out like years in advance, and they're like billions of dollars. So when does it get recorded? All of this money, is it recorded when they decide to sponsor the event, when the event happens, after the event? Tell us about that.
So here we follow the accrual principle. We always do that in macroeconomic statistics. So basically, we record a service when it's being delivered. So that would be when the company get the brand exposure, which would typically be during the World Cup. So if a company is paying way in advance, that would only be recorded in the financial account, but the service itself will only be recorded when it's delivered. So probably during the World Cup.
Okay, so just like a ticket sale, right? You might buy your tickets in advance. The production doesn't really happen until you're sitting in the stadium watching the match. It's the same way with the sponsorship.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct.
Okay, so now let's bring in like this global aspect, because I mean, after all, this is the World Cup. So this is not the Canadian Cup or the U.S. Cup or the Denmark Cup. This is the World Cup. So now suppose a Canadian company sponsors the World Cup. And the organizer is FIFA, which I believe is a Swiss company or is in Switzerland. So how is all that happening where you have Canada's the host, the Canadian firm is, Canada's a co-host, the Canadian firm is being a sponsor, FIFA is somewhere else in the world. How do those transactions work from a balanced payments perspective?
So in this example, the Canadian company is basically buying a service from a non-resident from FIFA. So we would record that as an import of advertising services. And just for the record, FIFA is the international body governing football or soccer, some might say, and it's, as you say, located in Switzerland.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of takes care of the sponsorship side. But now, what if somebody out of the goodness of their heart just says, well, I really want to support this World Cup, and just gives money to FIFA, and that's it, and then that's the end of the deal? Like, how would that be recorded?
So now we don't have a quid pro quo. So in this case, it's no longer a services transaction. That would be what we call a current transfer, which is basically a donation. And in that case, we don't record any output. We don't record any services. It's just a redistribution of income.
Okay, and I guess there'd be a cross-border element to this. In the case if we go back to the Canadian example, it would be a cross-border transfer? Is that?
Yeah, so the transfer would both be recorded by Canada and also by Switzerland.
Okay, so this is a lot of information you've given us, which I really appreciate, because I mean, sponsorship of something like the World Cup or the Olympics, that's really big business, and there's a lot of money flowing around. So I just want to make sure I got all this right. So the first thing you said is sponsorship is really an expense of the sponsoring company who's ever sponsoring. They would see it as intermediate consumption, as an expense. It's output for the FIFA or the organizing body. And then if it crosses borders, these are imports and exports of services. Did I get that right?
I think that's a great summary, Jim.
Okay, well, you're a great teacher, because I certainly learned something here. So the next time you see a brand logo on the field during the World Cup, remember, that logo isn't just marketing. It's part of global trade and services, carefully recorded in the economic accounts and the balance of payments. Thanks, Yannick. And remember, behind every sponsorship deal, there's a statistician figuring out how to measure it.